So Chip Kelly has made some really interesting comments about the future of what the future of college football could look like in a super idyllic situation. And I think he's right in a lot of ways, that there are some things that college football gets right and some things that college football gets wrong. If you haven't heard Chip Kelly's comments, I'll play them for you here. And I find them to be incredibly interesting because there are a couple of things that he gets really right. And there are a couple of things that he gets really wrong. And I'm surprised on the things that he gets wrong because he's a guy who spent a really long time in college football and has a really good grasp on college football. And yet he still doesn't get everything correct. And I guess I don't expect perfection out of him, but he's been around the block enough to know that some of the things that he is pitching, projecting, and says this could be an option are not realistic. So this is Chip Kelly when he was asked about basically the state of college football, NIL, conference realignment, etc. This is what Chip Kelly had to say when he was asked that question.
I think they're all a problem, and I think we need to have a conference commissioner. I think football should be separate from the other sports. Just the fact that our school is leaving to go to the Big Ten in football, our softball team should be playing Arizona in softball. Our basketball team should be playing Arizona in basketball. But because football left, and they're saying, well, how do you do that? Well, Notre Dame's independent in football, and they're in a conference and everything else. I think we should all be independent in football. And you can have a 64-team conference that's in the Power 5, and you can have a 64-team conference in the Group of 5. And we separate it, and we play each other. You can have the West Coast teams, and then every year we play 7 games against the West Coast teams, and then we play the East. So we play Syracuse, Boston College, Pitt, West Virginia, Virginia. Then the next year you play against the South while you still play your 7 teams. You can play a 7-game schedule. You can play 4 against another conference, another division opponent, and you can always play against one Mountain West team every year so that we can still keep those rivalries going. Not that I've really thought about this. Not that I've a lot of spent time on this. But I think if you went together collectively as a group and said there's 132 teams and we all share the same TV contract, so that the Mountain West doesn't have one and the Sun Belt doesn't have another and SEC has one and they have another, that we all go together, that's a lot of games, and there's a lot of people in the TV world that would go through it. You can sponsor each one. Instead of calling it Group of 5 and Power 5, you can call it Amazon, Nike, bid that out to things. You do a lot of different things. But I think if we still do the same thing and take all that money, and I would do this, and I think this needs to be done, that money now needs to be shared with the student athletes, and there needs to be revenue sharing, and the players should get paid, and you can get rid of NLI, and the schools should be paying the players because the players are what the product is. And the fact that they don't get paid is really the biggest travesty.
So there are a couple things there that I think Chip Kelly gets really right. I think the first one is to say that the players deserve a cut of the money. They absolutely do. And I see so many people argue against this, and their argument is essentially, well, I like the game better when the kids were amateurs. Like, on what planet did that have anything to do with your enjoyment of the game? Like, you either like football or you don't. The idea that because these are real, just strapping young students who are going to class every day, like, that hasn't been the case since like the 1950s. So stop it, first of all. Then secondly, the idea that the players deserve a cut of the cash is 100% warranted. And to see coaches like Chip Kelly and Jim Harbaugh come out and say, these guys deserve this money, is true. And I think that's only going to grow. And whether it's for nefarious purposes or not, whether Chip Kelly and Jim Harbaugh really believe that or they just view that as a recruiting advantage, I don't know. I think it's a little cynical to say that, like, having a principled take on capitalism is a bit cynical even for me to tackle, to say, like, hey, these guys don't actually believe that. They're just trying to trick kids into coming to their school. I think they probably do believe that on principle, you should be paid for your labor. And if somebody is going to make billions of dollars off of that, you should be fairly compensated. I don't think that's an outrageous opinion for one of those guys to have. So I truly believe that those two guys believe that. And I think that snowball is going to start rolling downhill. And I think the NCAA and the universities, athletic directors, presidents probably don't want that. But the coaches are the ones who have to figure this stuff out with those guys every single day. And they're going to have a different view on it than the people who are only looking out for their bottom line. So I think Chip Kelly is right. and that the players deserve a cut of that money. I think Chip Kelly is right in saying that college football needs a commissioner, that there needs to be one single person who is trying to get all 130 plus teams and everybody from the Power Five and the Group of Five pulling in the same direction. I believe that he is correct in that assessment. But like pretty much everything else in his thoughts, that's sort of like the sunshine and rainbows, unicorns, cotton candy, fluffy daisy world. Like, this is the real world. And you can pretend as if it's really simple to get one person to get everybody pulling in that same direction. But there's a reason that it hasn't been done in 150 years, and it isn't likely to happen anytime soon. Because when you have 130 plus institutions, colleges, universities, then you throw in the different entities from the conference standpoint, you have a lot of people pulling in a lot of different directions. On top of that, that's just inside the sport, let alone outside the sport with TV contracts, boosters, etc. Everybody has competing ideologies, competing things that they want to see happen and aren't going to agree with everybody else on. The idea that Texas A&M and UMass should be on the same page is just, that's not how college football works. The idea that Alabama and Air Force are going to think the exact same thing and believe that this thing is the best thing for college football's future, or whatever the case, whatever the topic may be, they're going to have differing priorities, differing opinions, and you have to figure out at the end of the day whose ideas should be prioritized, who is most important, which ideas are the most pressing, what the problems are. Now, Chip Kelly believes that the transfer portal and NIL are problems. I would say that he probably disagrees. Like, he might think that because he's lost a guy or two that he wants to keep due to NIL or the transfer portal. But the second that he gets somebody, he might change course. But the idea that it's just simple to elect one person to be the college football commissioner, Chip Kelly has been around the block enough to know that that is not easy. He's also, I think, been around the block enough to know that the idea that 132 colleges, universities, institutions, academies, whatever the case may be, were going to all pool their TV contracts and therefore split that money is one of the dumber things I've heard a college football coach say, especially a college football coach at a university that is leaving its long-standing relationships with 8 other schools to have its tennis team fly across the country to play games, to play matches. Chip Kelly knows that the chances of all 132 teams, all 132 schools squashing their current TV deal so they can all negotiate together is about as likely as me bumping uglies with Kate Upton in the next 15 minutes. It is not even a remote possibility. It cannot, will not happen. Because the reason, like, he is the head coach of a football team at an institution that is leaving behind 100 years of experience and history with 8 other schools for more TV money. And you know why those schools get more TV money than other schools, other conferences? Because they're worth more. If you think for 1 second Georgia is going to say, you know, I make a lot of money in the SEC right now, but let's go conferenceless so Akron can make the same money I do. It's just not going to happen under any circumstances. If aliens invaded planet Earth and the only thing that they wanted out of their invasion was for the 130 plus college football teams to scrap their TV contracts and play on a level playing field, it would not happen. The powers brokers of college football would let earth vanquish rather than see that happen. So the idea that that is even a remote possibility in fantasy land, yes, absolutely 100%. It makes all the sense in the world. Is that how it should be? Yes. If you were to start college football on December 18th, 100%. That is how it should be done. But when you have 150 years of history, and there are schools that really lean into that history and really believe that that defines them as institutions, and then you want me to share that history, that equity that I've built up as a brand name, a TV power, etc., and you want me to share that with Coastal Carolina? It's just not going to happen. So and to a lesser extent, I don't know that I want to see college football become NFL Junior. I don't want to see the map split up into divisions and these divisions play these divisions, etc. Like, I think college football going away from regionality is probably good for the sport overall. I understand that there have been some rivalries that have been lost, and that is strictly flat out 100% due to hubris. The idea that Pitt and West Virginia can no longer play each other because they're in different conferences is poppycock. The fact that A&M and Texas didn't play for a decade because they're in different conferences is stupid. There are rivalries that we have lost, and we are slowly gaining back because people got their panties out of a bunch and dealt with their feelings is a good thing for the sport. But if you want to get in a spot where you're playing the same 7 teams every year and then cross division, I don't want to see an NFL style schedule. Part of the fun of college football, and I mentioned this yesterday, that college football is a deeply unserious sport. Part of the fun is that the schedules aren't really balanced, equitable, fair across the board. For instance, next year, Ohio State's non-conference schedule is terrible. This year, Michigan's non-conference schedule was terrible. Generally, Georgia or pretty much anybody in the SEC's non-conference schedule is terrible. And so that's part of the fun of bickering and debating those things when you get towards the end of the season of who should be where, etc. Now, do I think there should be some uniformity? Yes. I think the College Football Playoff Committee should say, we're either playing 8 conference games or we're playing 9 conference games. We need to figure it out. You're either mandating that everybody plays a Power 5 out-of-conference game, which I think is the best thing for college football, or you're not. Because as long as things are uneven, things will remain deeply unserious, and there will be the ability to poke holes in damn near any argument. Anything that happens in the sport, you can point to and say, wait a second. It's basically like discussing home run totals in baseball. Like somebody who plays a left-handed hitter for the New York Yankees is going to be drastically different than a right-handed hitter for the Baltimore Orioles. But you can have those discussions, and you can point to whatever you want to point to say, this makes my case for me. This makes my argument. It's great for content. It's great for keeping the sport at the forefront, etc. But if you try to eliminate that by just basically saying, we're going to split up into 9 different divisions across America. And by the way, this year, the Great Lakes region is going to play the Far West region. Like, I don't want to see Little League World Series regions in college football. I want to see the biggest and best teams, the biggest and best brands play the most other interesting, biggest and best brands, teams, coaches on the best time slots in the most accessible manner. I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't think it's ridiculous to say, I want to see bigger and better games more frequently in front of bigger audiences that allow for more fun. Because while you can argue that the college football regular season is the most important regular season in sports, and you're right, you can also argue that it's the least consequential, because when Michigan suits up on a Saturday in September, October, and November, how many of those games can they realistically lose? Even if they played their worst game of the season and their opponent played their best game of the season, how many of those games can they lose in 2023? 3. So 9 other games. 9 of their games are, I don't really need to tune in because it's not going to be all that interesting, close, nail-biting, etc. And there aren't many other sports where 85% of the games are decided really before the other team gets off the bus. So the key to building college football is seeing UCLA play more games against USC, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska, Wisconsin. And then alternatively, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Clemson, Florida State, Texas, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Notre Dame. You can pretend as if all 130 plus teams are on equal footing and that everybody is as interested in James Madison as they are Oklahoma. Or you could recognize that there are about 20 teams, 20 programs that really, truly move the needle. And you need as many games between those 20 programs as possible if you really, really, really want to grow the upper echelons of college football. And I think Chip Kelly knows that. But I don't know that Chip Kelly's in a spot where his school is one of those 20 programs, and I don't think he wants to be left out of that. But he knows better than to say, oh, you just scrap everybody's TV deals and we'll do them all as one. No. Who's going to agree to that in the Power 5, soon to be Power 4, and truthfully, Power 2? Not many. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. We certainly do appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out here on Saturday Glory. If you are listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. We'll be back at it tomorrow right here on the Daily Huddle with Saturday Glory.